Not only do we not know, but we cannot know. So after talking about the fundamental uncertainty, which is a feature of the world itself, which is built into the world itself, the fundamental uncertainty, we will look at the unsettling story of the persistent incompleteness, which seems to be a feature of our knowledge that we can never get rid of. I want to define incompleteness, the incompleteness of our knowledge. I want to explore some of its very interesting siblings and to see what this concept of incompleteness means for our understanding of the world, our understanding of ourselves, but also our creativity, our creativeness, our ability to make new technologies, our work in art, in business, and on. We will start from the math, but this is, as usual, this is not a math episode, and there will be no real math, not even a single equation, I hope. We will see what this stubborn, inevitable incompleteness of intelligence, as I called it in Fuzzy on the Dark Side, means for us personally and collectively. So we talked about Calvin's clouds, we talked about Laplace's demons, and now it's time to say something about Hilbert's program. David Hilbert was a great German mathematician who around the beginning of the 20th century proposed a solution, a way out of some of the foundational crises that started appearing in mathematics. Some paradoxes started appearing, and in order to solve some of these paradoxes, Hilbert proposed a program, and his program basically tried to create a complete and consistent system of mathematics. That was a very ambitious proposal. A complete and consistent system of mathematics that relies on a set of axiomatic foundations. Okay, so building a program of knowledge based on a finite set of rules. And this idea was not unique to Hilbert. It is part of a general ethos, as we talked about last time, of the Enlightenment, a certain trust in science, in knowledge, in the human capacity for intelligence, which was reflected throughout the works of many thinkers. And so Hilbert reflected this optimism, beautiful, naive optimism, if we might say, in the statement, "We must know, we will know." And these words are engraved on his tombstone. Now, sadly, there was a problem with Hilbert's program, with this whole proposal, with this whole endeavor, because a few years later it was formally proven mathematically by a brilliant mathematician named Kurt Gödel that this doesn't work. There can be no completeness based on these principles. And this is what we'll try to explore, not mathematically, but conceptually, and what it means within the framework of the philosophy of science and our work in the world, and art and literature, and understanding the world, and even technology. But not only this, to complicate things further, or to make them more interesting, in all science there is something else. There is another ghost you can add to this inevitable incompleteness, which is the ghost of we can never express what we know. And we will see what this also means. But this in itself is also a component that complicates the issue further. And on a much wider scale, because it goes beyond the formal and the ideal systems, like mathematics, right? Mathematics is formal, ideal. It's as close as we can get to perfect. This is why mathematics is beautiful. But if mathematics will be perpetually incomplete, then of course science will have problems, not the least of which is that we can never express fully what we know. So this discussion will start here. It is a feature of the world. The uncertainty is a built-in feature of the world. Then it's kind of natural, and we had to expect this, that incompleteness will be a feature of our knowledge of the world, no matter what. And so we will see what this incompleteness means conceptually, in terms of our identity, our understanding of ourselves, and in terms of our creativity. So in response to Hilbert's program, a couple of decades later, there was something published by a young mathematician named Kurt Gödel that basically destroyed the program. So what was that? Well, this has to do with Gödel's incompleteness theorem. And we won't go into the details too much just to know the big idea here. And basically, Gödel's incompleteness theorem says that any formal axiomatic system rich enough, so this is a knowledge system, but it's formal and axiomatic, which is what Hilbert said, that we can build the foundations of mathematics on simple, consistent, complete system of axioms, right? So if there was this formal axiomatic system and it was rich enough to encompass basic arithmetic, Gödel showed that it will inevitably contain statements that cannot be proved. Okay, so he showed that these kinds of systems that are complex enough, that are rich enough, they will always have statements that can never be proved. Okay, true statements that can never be proved within these rules. And this has something to do with self-reference. Okay, but basically what this means is that the system cannot be complete, right? It has true statements in it that it cannot prove, so the system cannot be complete. And he later added another step to that, another blow, which is basically that a system cannot prove its own consistency. Okay, so a system cannot tell you that it is consistent. And so this meant that there was no way, if you think about it, again, the self-reference thing, there was no way for mathematics to fully certify itself from within. Okay, and these two proofs, known as Gödel's incompleteness theorem first and second, have a very profound impact on our hubris, our place in the world, right? Like the Copernican revolution, sort of redefining how we understand things, redefining how we understand our place, particularly here in relation to our knowledge and to the extents of our knowledge. So this incompleteness has many faces. It has many different aspects. It is most interesting to look at the incompleteness from the perspective of a perfect ideal system like mathematics, but of course it's present in all the sciences. And here I want to mention a few ideas from the philosophy of science that kind of reflect a similar thought. So Polanyi talks about the tacit element in science. He actually calls it the tacit dimension. And basically what Polanyi wants to say is that there is always a tacit element, a portion of science that cannot be communicated. Okay, we have different experiences, and science has always been about trying to objectively describe our understanding of the world, and this has led to formalism, like in the case of Hilbert. But Polanyi is saying that, well, there is a lot of tacit knowledge involved. Scientists choose certain problems to work on. They work from within certain ideas, conceptualizations of the world. And this is a direct challenge to formalism, right? To the efficiency of formalism. Also, it's a blow to objectivity, to the objectivity of science. So that's what blows to objectivity and formalism, by looking at the way we form personal knowledge and the way tacit knowledge is shaped. And we can always communicate less than we know. Right? This is something I mentioned before, and this is partly what is meant by this tacit dimension. We can communicate less than we know. Another perspective on this is Thomas Kuhn's and his structure of scientific revolutions. And basically Kuhn says that all science works from within paradigms. And this means that any set of theories is a specific lens, a specific perspective on the world. It's a limited perspective. It's an incomplete perspective. There is no God-level view, right? There is no view that sees the whole thing. There are only lenses that see certain aspects of reality, incomplete aspects of reality. And when these sets of theories, these systems of knowledge, and look at the similarity here, when they increase enough to start facing more contradiction, so when they attempt to become more complete, they run into more inconsistencies until this paradigm itself gets replaced by another more general paradigm. Okay, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn. Third, Karl Popper and falsifiability. So he says that the essential quality of science is its falsifiability. And this is very interesting, because falsifiability in a sense means that science is not about these truths that are final and eternal. We are always updating our understandings, right? So again, incomplete. We are always updating these understandings by new data, right? Seeing a black swan every day doesn't mean that all swans are black. It's just a probability of some sort. And so all of these are ideas strengthening this concept of the inevitable incompleteness. And I want to take a quick look here first at this concept of the hidden shadow. There is something hiding, right? Incompleteness means, well, there is something we are not seeing. And it has many different concepts. One of them is in decision making. We don't make rational decisions, right? Our knowledge is incomplete, of course, but we don't make rational decisions. Why? Because there are all these aspects that we can't see, we can't understand, and they come into the picture. Same concept as we said with Polanyi's the idea of personal knowledge. So formalism always leaves out something. If I want to think of a concept of a scientific theory, that's great, it's beautiful in my mind. But as I try to formalize it for me to communicate it objectively to others, it leaves out something. And this something is a personal element that is sometimes necessary for a complete understanding. Finally, a couple of interesting ideas. I want to talk about Eco's library. So Umberto Eco is a great writer, has some very interesting novels, and a huge library of books, which obviously he hasn't read all of the books in this library. There is a funny story I read that he got evicted from a building once because a city engineer was concerned that the building might fall because of all of Eco's books. So here, and Eco actually says, it is foolish to believe that one should read all the books in their own library. And this idea of Eco's library is a very subtle and elegant pointer at this idea of the incompleteness of our knowledge, what we don't know. The books that we haven't read represent all that we don't know, and it is much bigger than all what we know. It is the negative. They also represent a path for the future. And so, in a sense, there is also this inevitable incompleteness, even with the knowledge of your own library. So what does all this discussion about incompleteness have to do with identity? Well, it does. Incompleteness points to identity. The missing part within the incompleteness equation is something that gets filled by our individual identity. Recall that when I talked about Polanyi in the previous section, I said that Polanyi describes personal knowledge and the tacit dimension in terms of this set of biases, individual preferences, passions, personal experiences, and so on. And every effort to formalize leaves out all these personal elements, right? We can always communicate less than we know. This personal element that gets left out turns out to be very important because the personal element connects the different experiences. It gives extra depth to this formalization. It gives it context. We also talked about Thomas Kuhn and his idea of scientific revolutions and the idea of the paradigm as a lens through which we see the world. This is a system of theories, but it is a certain perspective. And as we said, well, there is no God-level view that sees everything. We always have to work, or scientists always have to work through these limited perspectives called paradigms. Okay, but what limits these perspectives? What causes these limits? Where do these limits come from? Turns out that they come from individual and collective identities, in a sense, from inertia within a certain system, from things we inherit from the past. So here I want to link all this to identity further. You can say that the hubris, the optimism, the human hubris and the human optimism have received 3 strong blows. The first was when we found out that the Earth is not the center of the universe, right? The Copernican revolution. The second blow is with Darwin's theory of evolution. Things flow, beings flow, and they keep on changing all the time. And the third blow comes from Freud and Carl Jung. And basically, by stressing the idea that, well, you're not the center of the universe, you're not unique on Earth. Well, everything is unique in a sense, but you're not that unique. And third, you don't even know yourself. So most of the human understanding, most of the human psyche is what Freud called the unconscious, right? Jung called that the shadow, that which we cannot see or that which we cannot know. And interestingly, this is very closely related to identity. Jung talks about integrating the shadow into your identity. And this gives us links about the formation of this identity, because the identity is that which cannot very clearly formalize Otherwise, everybody will have the same identity, right? So look at the self-reference dimension that is here. And this is something that we need to reflect on. Who are you? How do you define yourself? Can you define yourself without referring to yourself? And this links to Gödel's incompleteness theorem. The self-reference is very important here, and I recommend checking out the book Gödel, Escher, Bach, An Eternal Golden Braid, and I Am a Strange Loop by Hofstadter. These are very interesting books. So, who are you? Can you define yourself without referring to yourself? And as we saw, self-reference is what eventually collapses this idea of a knowledge system having both consistency and completeness. You can link that to the idea of meta-narratives and these big, illusory, collective stories that they are complete and consistent. They cannot. Our cultural systems are incomplete knowledge systems. Our deepest assumptions are tacit, unclear, and sometimes even to us. But this carries hope. So incompleteness is reflected everywhere in the world of creativity in our lives. It's everywhere. Most obviously in art. If we take a look at Escher, and we've talked about this before, how do you resolve this? How does this image end? Can it ever be complete? Think about it. The two hands drawing each other, the self-reference. For one of them to be complete, what does the other have to do? And we can link this to Rashomon. We also talked about that. So the incompleteness of one perspective means that you need to accommodate all these other perspectives. And this creates enormous richness, enormous beauty in the world because the perspectives are not the same. Each of them carries just a tinge of this personal element that Polanyi talks about. You can link this also to Cubism and Picasso. And in Cubism, we are trying to get these different faces of reality in the same time, right? And Picasso says, well, art is not the truth directly, right? We all know that art is not the truth. It is a lie that makes us realize the truth. Look at the incompleteness, the tacitness here. I cannot communicate the truth directly to you. It only has to happen through lies, right? And lies are incompleteness in a sense. And what if I told you that there is a piece of music, 4 minutes, 33 seconds, that is completely silent? So this is John Cage's famous piece. And the question here is, if you sit in a hole for 4 minutes, 33 seconds and listen to the silence, listen to this piece of music, where is the work of art really? Is it the small sounds? Is it the thoughts? Is it the movements of the museum? Is it the background noise? Somebody sneezing? Incomplete. And finally, and this one is probably my favorite, Godot never comes, right? Okay, so moving from the beautiful world of art to tech, engineering, and management. In management and in design, there are a number of methodologies that seem to let go of this idea of we will know exactly what to do, right? It starts with the assumption of our knowledge is incomplete. And because our knowledge is incomplete, I don't attempt to build the perfect thing from the start. This is why we have methodologies like Agile and so on that are step by step. We try to design an object, even if it's a dirty MVP at first, just a minimum viable object at first, because you don't know. Your knowledge is incomplete of how people will use this, how people will work with this, and what people really need. So we start with this admission of incompleteness, and this paves the way for better creations. Almost a direct application of this also happens in AI, which is very interesting now, because Gödel's work on incompleteness inspired Alan Turing, who in turn was a crucial figure in the development of computing. But think about this. How does a neural network work? Doesn't work in a top-down way, starting from formalisms and basic truths, right? It works by training a black box, training a certain set of AI on output, on acceptable outputs. Then it tries to figure out the in-between, which is, to us, a black box. We cannot see it exactly. Certain AI-related tasks, certain machine intelligence-related tasks, like recognizing faces, speech recognition, image generation, didn't start working properly until computer scientists stopped trying to make it into a linear program and instead just trained machines on data, telling them this is acceptable, this is not acceptable. This is how AI has developed. And it is a feature of incompleteness, a direct result of the power of incompleteness implemented within computer science. So back to the first sentence. Why is incompleteness the source of creativity in our lives? Isn't it obvious by now? We have this desire to fill in the gaps, to look at the shadow, that dark place. And beautifully, there will always be a shadow. Let's complete this discussion on incompleteness by looking at awareness, intent, creativeness. And so basically trying to think about what does all this mean? Who are we? And what should we do? So first, as a quick question, isn't too much completeness a pointer or equivalent to death? Isn't completeness too quiet, too stable, and in that sense, too similar to death? Well, we are looking at that, and we are looking at how incompleteness is this built-in movement in our work. But remember that we tried to understand incompleteness by looking at these two variables. So the first obviously is completeness, the level of detail of a certain knowledge system. The second is consistency. And we saw that they don't happen, they can't happen. First, because of self-reference. A system complex enough cannot be complete, but also a system cannot claim or certify its own consistency. Two beautiful, unsettling, and devastating implications. Let's think about the incompleteness of knowledge, and specifically the weaknesses of formalism. So we cannot have a formal system that is complete. This is very interesting. We can never have a formal knowledge system that is complete. Science can never be complete. Mathematics itself can never be complete. And even though we said that formalism have these strong boundaries, these limitations, it is still the best in terms of something that we can communicate, in terms of something that can be communicated. But remember what Polanyi said, that we cannot communicate everything we know. And so, is that enough? Is it enough that formalism is the best that we have in terms of what can be communicated? Or is it too incomplete? Second point is, well, who are we? And I talked before about these meta-narratives. The meta-narratives that try to collectively explain everything in the world. So they claim to be too complete and too consistent. And there is a problem with this. Think about it. What is our culture? What is a meta-narrative? And we said that, well, some forms of culture include religious and nationalistic cultures, claim to be consistent and complete. And this is interesting. But how do these questions of identity, incompleteness, and creativity fit here? If we say that cultures are knowledge systems that are designed to help us understand the world, understand our own identity, who we are, and work, be creative in the world. Can we take these cultures as they are, or should we try to bridge the incompleteness by using our own individual and personal tacit dimension? This idea of self-reference is very important and very interesting here. And it takes me to the link to emergence. So what should we do? What can we do? First, ideas of incompleteness take us in a direction towards more openness. This closed system, this closed knowledge system can never be complete and consistent. So you need to be open. You need to be more accepting of these other perspectives because yours isn't complete. Takes us towards more humility. This idea of the complementarity that exists between consistency and completeness is very interesting, and it is humbling in a sense. And finally, and as a link towards complexity and emergence, which I hope to talk about, to explore in the future, and this is a personal observation, we sometimes rush and get too agitated in our urgency. We try to run to complete something quickly, but that is an illusion, right? The best that you can do is try to build more, try to create more perspectives, try to engage with more systems, and then hopefully something true, good, and beautiful will emerge out of that. And there is something very comforting about this.